Throughout the 1700s and 1800s, slaves were imported from Africa to Europe, North America, and South America. The exchange of African Americans in the South increased rapidly and soon gained national attention. This caused a conflict between the Northern and Southern states, or the Union and the Confederate, and created the Civil War. However, on January 1, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued a ban on all slavery called the Emancipation Proclamation. After this document was published, racism and discrimination against blacks was unfortunately still present in the United States. The Ku Klux Klan emerged, police became aggressive, and even white churches encouraged lynching of African Americans. Slowly but surely, civil rights activists came forth and spoke up during the 1950s through the 1960s. Many led marches, sit-ins, and formed organizations. These were organizations such as the NAACP and the SNCC, or the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Commission. These organizations provided independence for colored people who were fighting for their rights. A large branch of discrimination as well as activism occurred in the city of Memphis. The city of Memphis during the 50s and 60s were years of music, culture, and entertainment. They were also filled with hardships, hate, and much racism. This was because of the segregation between whites and blacks. Sports, schools, lunch counters, and even buses were segregated. Protesters fought against segregation to make the South integrated. This created the historical event, the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement is what led public areas to become integrated and defeat segregation and racism. One large branch of segregation took place in churches. Civil rights activists worked to get churches integrated in order to help African Americans receive their rights.
We went to one church that will remain nameless, but it's here in Memphis. A group of us sitting in went to that church Sunday morning, and the male ushers of the church said to us, we couldn't go in, and y'all get away from our damn church. Okay. Of course, we didn't get away, and they were arrested.
Segregated churches supposedly believed in diversity and fellowship. However, this was not clear because many white churches turned away blacks or whites accompanied by blacks. Activists soon realized the church's level of hypocrisy and became angry because of it. This hurt civil rights activists' determination to defeat segregation in Memphis. Many felt they would be automatically welcomed by any church of any race because of the biblical beliefs within the church. Unfortunately, they were wrong and suffered disappointment. Many white churches did not have useful information to support their beliefs of segregation. In fact, during the 1800s when slavery was stirring, slave owners believed in teaching the ways of the Bible, for they believed it would help them work more easily. As the Bible commanded slaves to obey their masters, slaves soon discovered it also said respect your slaves. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both your master and theirs is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. Even some white churches used analogies referring to animals. The following quote is an example of this. Bluebirds never mate with redbirds.
Most Christians were not confident that the Bible was a good source of support for segregation. And so they came up with arguments like that were sort of quasi-natural arguments. Like, just look at nature and, they're distinct species and people, different animals congregate with other animals of the same type. People said things like that as if to indicate that segregation was a natural phenomenon and it ought to be maintained.
The segregated church's lack of proof gave activists something to build on, and people like Martin Luther King Jr. spread their ideas nationally, but was of course discouraged by white churches. This did not stop protesters from moving forward. One way protesters fought off segregated churches was through their own church. Some say the black churches were the backbone of protesters of the civil rights movement. Activists even claimed to be followers of Jesus Christ and were stronger because of it. Ministers who often belonged to African American churches led marches and what are called kneel-ins. This is if the protesters were denied entrance, they were to remain outside of the church and sing, pray, or even hold their own sermon. And on Palm Sunday in 1964, students Joe Purdy, James Bullock, and Howard Romaine, two of whom were white, attempted to attend Second Presbyterian Church in Memphis, Tennessee. All three left, being threatened to call the police. However, every week they returned with a larger group of protesters, each time participating in a kneel-in. Eventually, these events began catching the eye nationally and even caught the eye of National Presbyterian Board member Carl Pritchett. Pritchett participated in a kneel-in himself and insisted the church's General Assembly be canceled due to their poor decisions. Eventually, the church held a congregation-wide meeting to allow blacks into their church. After this decision was made, 10% of the church left to form their own independent Presbyterian church.
I think in 1964, when it was a combination of white students and black students, I think the white students got involved in the movement at Second Presbyterian Church because this was a Presbyterian college, and most of the students were more liberal and progressive in their views than were the faculty or the administration or the members of Second Pres, and it was a way for them to sort of push the issue and really make the church demonstrate where it stood on what they regarded as this important issue. A lot of these white kids were church kids who had grown up in Presbyterian homes and gone to Presbyterian camps, but they really thought that the church needed to be on the right side of this issue, and they thought that it wasn't, and they wanted to make that clear.
On August 30th, 1960, a group of African American students decided to come together and participate in a religious ceremony at the Levitt Shell in Overton Park. The purpose of this was to integrate the ceremony in ease. This ceremony ended in arrests and charges. Some were burdened with both.
Going to Overton Park was a part of the overall movement. Our intent was to break down all the barriers throughout the city. And Overton Park, we perceived it as being a public institution, a public place, and that the same taxes that I paid on coats and bread or other items, that was the source of funding for Overton Park Shell. So since I was helping to pay for it, why couldn't I come? So it was just a part, it's just that we had moved to that level. By the time we got to Overton Park, we had already integrated the lunch counters, we had integrated the fairgrounds, the zoo, and the restaurants. So it was just a part of the public facilities aspect that led us to Overton Park.
Charges were made for disrupting a religious ceremony, even though the civil rights students had only quietly spread out among the crowd to listen to the sermon.
Because it was a church event, and it was a youth event, and we were all young people, and we thought we'd be welcomed.
And finally, on April 11th, 1968, not long after Martin Luther King's death, President Johnson issued the Civil Rights Act, which banned all racial segregation within the United States. This turned the entire country around in a new direction. Therefore, churches became legally integrated, even though some say the most segregated hour in America is still 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning.
The results of the movement and slavery will be with us at least another 100 years, at least. But you guys will work it out. You will.